I think Terminator 2 is actually the greatest family film ever made. So this film was released on July the 1st, 1991 and had a budget of 102 million, making it at that point the most expensive film ever made. The film stars Arnold Schwarzenegger, obviously, Linda Hamilton, a young Robert Patrick and an even younger Edward Furlong in his first film role. And before I move on any further, please feel free to give me a follow on X, and if you fancy a trip to 2017 Twitter, you can follow me on Blue Sky. So this film follows young John Connor, the leader of the future resistance, as he attempts to navigate life as a teenager on the cusp of becoming the saviour of mankind. And just because there's only about 3 of you that hasn't seen this film yet, that doesn't mean I'm not going to be as thorough as usual. And in this film, 2 Terminators have been sent back. One to protect him, the other one to unalive him. And this is played brilliantly throughout the entire first part of the film, because to the audience in 1991, they didn't know who was the villain. A very big proportion of the audience would have been assuming that the T-1000 was the good guy, because in the previous film, let's have it right, Arnie was the bad guy. So teasing that out for as long as they did in the beginning of the film is a work of genius. It gives us one of the most shocking twists in science fiction, as well as giving us a little bit of foreshadowing for something that's about to happen later on. We then get that iconic chase scene as well through the storm drain, and that is, without exception, one of the most outstanding moments in film history, all done practically as well. So now the Terminator has saved John. As far as he's concerned, it's mission accomplished. Well, not according to John, because he wants to go and rescue his mum, whom, unfortunately, at this point, is being kept at a psychiatric hospital. Owing to the wildly implausible events of the first film, unfortunately, they just assume that Sarah has had some sort of psychotic break. Worse still, she's actually quite dangerous with it. So to that end, they lock her up. But she's not exactly been a model patient. Since she got put away, she's bulked herself up, made repeated escape attempts, and now she's got to be kept in maximum security. Against the T-800's advice, John decides no, he wants to bust his mum out. So they head to the hospital. So does the T-1000. They both arrive at the hospital at sort of the same time, but their means of entry are wildly different. Because even though John Connor has said to the Terminator, you've got to promise not to kill anybody, he still shoots his way in. Whereas the T-1000, being a much more advanced design, is able to use its power of mimicry to infiltrate the hospital. So as they're approaching Sarah from different ends of the hospital, she's busy trying to break out herself, because they visited her earlier on and they're like, look, hey, this machine man thing that you said about years ago, well, he's back and he's after your son. So like any mother, she is desperate to get out of there, taking the abusive doctor with her. She holds him hostage and she tries to make a getaway, and she almost does it. She gets right to the lift and the doors open and out walks the T-800. And remember I said a moment ago about that foreshadowing? Well, it was this scene here, because as far as she's concerned, he is the bad guy. So we get another really subtle but fantastic piece of filmmaking here. This entire scene is brilliant, because firstly, what the director's doing here is making you root for the Terminator. At the beginning of the film, you're thinking, hey, no, John, run away from this thing. But now you're desperate for our heroes to run to this thing. He even repeats the same line from the first film. When Sarah is introduced to Carl Reese, he says to her, come with me if you want to live, when he's trying to get her away from this thing. It's only the fact that John's there and he's going, no, Mum, wait, come on, come with us. It makes her, well, she doesn't trust it, but she trusts John, and she knows she's got to go with it. So yeah, as an audience, we're taking on a real journey here, from fear of this machine and being on the edge of our seats for our heroes to get away from it, to now urging our heroes to run towards it. But they also manage to find time to squeeze something else in, because Earl Bowen steals every scene he's in, and he's a complete slimeball. He knows the regime in this hospital is quite abusive. He seemingly built a career off of the back of his work with Sarah Connor, and he shows zero compassion for her. Okay, yeah, it is stated she's been quite violent to him, but he does seem to enjoy showing her off, like his very own pet lunatic, and he's very disparaging of her stories. And it's actually quite subtle, but the moment the Terminator saves Sarah Connor, he renders everybody else unconscious by like throwing them out of windows and things, or simply just pushing them down a corridor by their faces. Either way, he's the only one that's still conscious, this guy. So he sees the superhuman strength of this being that's in front of him, because let's face facts here, he still thinks it might be human and that these are all part of Sarah's delusions that it's a robot, but he witnesses the T-1000 as it slithers through the bars, and everything Sarah's been warning him about for years, well, it turns out to be true. But importantly, he's the only one that's still awake to see it. And let's have it right, Sarah tried to inject him with drain cleaner, so he's always going to have a little bit of doubt in his mind as well now. Did I see what I saw, or was it the effect of the drain cleaner? Either way, now he knows how Sarah felt all these years, because he's the only one that knows the truth. I would like to know in the comments though, if you was around when this film was released. How was this film promoted to you? Was you aware before you went into the cinema that Arnie was going to be the good guy? Or was you utterly shocked by it? And Arnie himself is on record. He turned around and said like, look, he didn't want to do the film if he was going to be the bad guy again. Anyway, let me know in the comments. After this, we get another truly iconic scene where we see the awesome power of the T-1000, and it's just absorbing immense amounts of punishment. We see that this thing is capable of receiving a shotgun blast to the face, yet it's still able to pursue a moving vehicle, and it nearly catches it as well. It gets onto the boat, and it's only the T-800's quick thinking that gets rid of it. So at this point, the trio decide they need to seek shelter. In what is bizarrely a deleted scene, we get a really great moment between Sarah and John when they're resetting the CPU on the T-800 so it can actually start learning. Sarah just wants to smash it in with an hammer, but it's played very well. You don't know whether John's just being naive because he's only a kid, and that Sarah's being the pragmatic one by taking the opportunity now while it's switched off to destroy the thing, or whether it's John showing some genuinely mature thinking, because he's more aware of the fact that, hey, this thing could come in quite handy, because that other thing that's chasing us, well, that's lethal, that is. In the end, Sarah relents and they decide to keep the T-800. They head south because Sarah's got some very good friends. They're quite unconventional, but in this situation, they're the kind of friends that you need. When they arrive, Sarah is taking no prisoners. She's like, look, we need to tool up. We need the shooters, we need ammo, we need food, and we need transport. And thankfully, her friends oblige, and she sends John and the Terminator to gather weapons and ammo. It's while they're doing this, she makes an observation, and it is really key to the point I'm making about this film, because it's at that point she realises that the Terminator and John and herself, well, like it or not, they are a family now. They have been brought together under the worst circumstances, but here they are nonetheless. And she actually realises that, well, this machine is the best candidate for a father that John has ever had, because he weren't going to be abusive to him. He was always going to listen. He was always going to be there. He was always going to be his guardian. And it's true, throughout this film, John spends more time bonding with the Terminator than he does with his own mother, who he hasn't seen in years. And in actual fact, in many ways, she's more cold towards him and more machine-like towards him than the Terminator is. And look at the scene where she thinks he's been injured. She doesn't seek to comfort him. She's just checking him for injuries, because she's incapable of seeing him as anything more than this sort of future leader, this sort of future messiah-like character. And it's this revelation and a nightmare that she has as well that leads her to fully understand what Kyle had said to her all those years before, when he says there is no fate but what we make. The future isn't written yet. So, while John and the Terminator are gathering these weapons, it's important to note as well that John and the Terminator aren't at this point gathering weapons to go and blow up a computer lab. The weapons they're getting together are done so with the sole purpose of defending themselves from the T-1000. In their minds, they're just getting all this together for some crazy last stand against him. That's not what Sarah's got in mind, because, as I said, while they're doing this, she decides to head back north, because Sarah, well, she's sort of turning into a Terminator. She's heading up north to unalive Mr. Terminator's himself. She's going to go and get Mr. Miles Dyson. the man chiefly responsible for the development of Skynet. And remember a moment ago when I said about families? Well, there's another one here. And it's important to take note with this film as well, that each family that's presented to you, well, they're all dysfunctional in one way or another. From the foster family that John lives with. I mean, those foster parents are just the worst. I mean, they've got a kid in their care who's got very complex emotional needs and is displaying some real behavioural problems. This kid is clearly traumatised, yet they make zero effort with him. The dad's completely useless, seemingly more interested in his sports on the television and his powerful car outside, and the foster mum, she's completely fredders with him. All she knows how to do is shout at the kid. They are at their wits' end with him, but they've made no effort with him. They've not delved into this child to see what they can do to actually help him, to make him grow and make him develop. This is one of the most toxic families I've ever seen on a film. And the Dyson family as well. They seemingly are a little bit more functional, but it's only the mum that's holding that family together, because Miles Dyson, well, he's completely absent, and it's only through his wife's intervention that he makes himself available to his children for just one afternoon. And even when that's done, he's straight back on the computer working. Yet ironically enough, it's his children that save his life, because as Sarah is about to unalive him, by some out-and-out miracle, his son crashes a remote control car into his leg, which makes him bend down. And it's this point, Sarah takes the shot. Misses, obviously. She's a complete Terminator here, because she's completely without remorse, she's completely focused on the mission at hand, and she steams into that house like a Terminator. Even her walk is very reminiscent of the T-1000, but she can't do it, because she's got one fleck of humanity left. She sees the kid trying to protect his dad, and she just can't pull the trigger. And at this moment as well, John and the T-800 have caught up with her. John's brilliant in this scene. He's actually showing real maturity, real growth, and he's slowly becoming that lead age, slowly becoming John Connor, the leader of the resistance, because he's in real command here. He comforts his own mother and has a real moment with her where she finally tells him how much she loves him, whilst at the same time managing to bring Dyson on board. And that's no mean feat. You've just invaded the man's home. One of you just tried to unalive him, yet you still managed to compel him to join your team. Edward Furlong is brilliant in this film. And, to be honest with you, it was his first part. He'd never acted before. He was just some street urchin they picked up, gave him some acting lessons, taught him a bit of Spanish, taught him how to ride motorcycles, and that was it. He was away. So they managed to bring Dyson on board. They get him and his wife, and the T-800 shows him his robotic endoskeleton. And he's like, nah, I'm having none of this. I'm stopping working on it right now. And Sarah and the T-800 are like, that's not enough. Like, we need to properly end this now. And even his wife's on board as well. She's like, yeah, we're changing history as we speak. Like, we can do this. We can stop Skynet. So onwards. Now, throughout the rest of the film, it's just all action. And I've got to be honest with you, I think this entire film is the greatest action film of all time. So they head off up to Cyberdyne Systems and they get past security and they head up to the offices above. You get some great moments between each of the characters, but let's have it right. The old Bill are on their way, and they're heading there in large numbers. They're heading there in large numbers, and they mean business as well. Because as far as they're concerned, that T-800 is just a man, and he's the same man that unalived loads of them in 1984. So they're after him. And I keep saying it in this video, but we get this really iconic moment where the T-800 goes to deal with the police. And yeah, that minigun prop is the same prop from Predator from a few years before. So the T-800 just sets about the police. He's like, nah, none of this. He hoses them down with a minigun and for good measure hits them with a grenade launcher as well. The police give as good as they get in the end, but let's face facts here. Small arms fire against a T-800 ain't gonna do much, especially at that range. Dyson is mortally wounded though. The T-800, Sarah and John make an escape, but Dyson can't hold out much longer and he sets the bombs off. I honestly think that's one of the greatest explosions ever in a film. What they did here was they took an office block that was part of the studios that they were using. They added an extra floor to its facade and just filled it up with just shit tons of petrol. And from there it's really simple, you just blow fuck out of it. So that's why we get that kind of explosion, that really visceral and fiery blowout we see. It's all done because they use petrol. But the awesomeness doesn't stop there, because we get another one of the greatest car chases ever in a film. We've already had one earlier on, but now it's police van versus a helicopter being flown by a T-1000. And the stunts on this scene are just incredible. The stunts throughout this film are amazing, but in particular here, they're just great. So there's a moment where the police helicopter flies underneath a bridge and the camera operator just refused to film it. He's like, no, I'm not having none of this. Someone's going to get hurt and I ain't having nothing to do with it. So James Cameron himself had to step in. And they didn't do the stunt once, neither. They've done it 3 times. They've done it one in front, one behind, and one from a distance. This car chase scene, though, ultimately culminates in, yet again, one of the most iconic moments in film history. Because as this chase has progressed, they've had to switch vehicles. And the T-1000 is now driving a lorry load of liquid nitrogen, which he crashes and freezes himself with, which gives Arnie an opportunity to be just iconic, yet again, for the 20th time in this film. I'm not going to bother doing Arnie's accent because I don't do a particularly good one, but he delivers the line, "Hasta la vista, baby," before he shoots the T-1000, shattering him into a million pieces. But this don't last very long though, and he starts to melt and reassemble himself. But he is damaged, he's glitching out. Later on, John manages to work out that he's not actually talking to his mum because of this, when he looks down at his boots and he sees they've merged into the floor. And it's this point as well, Sarah gets a massively badass moment. I mean, women in action films at this point, there had been a few badass moments for them, most notably Sigourney Weaver in Aliens, but it wasn't fully mainstreamed yet. These kind of moments were generally reserved for the men, especially in an Arnold Schwarzenegger film as well. But Sarah Connor here is iconic and she's tooled up. And the T-1000 has fuck blown out of it. She hits him again and again and again until he's on the edge and he's about to fall in when she runs out of ammo. And all is seemingly lost until Arnie, after having his head stoved in by the T-1000, has finally regained consciousness, comes out of nowhere, and again delivers one of the most iconic moments in cinema history. I keep saying that about this film, it's getting embarrassing at this point. That is not normally my catchphrase, but I can't help it with this film. He does him with a grenade launcher. He does him with a gut shot. He blows him in half and he falls backwards into the liquid metal. And he starts thrashing around and changing his form, literally turning himself inside out. And ultimately, he gets unalived. And now the film gives us its saddest moment. Because Skynet cannot be truly beaten until every part of it has been destroyed. And unfortunately, like it or not, the T-800 is part of it. The computer chip, which they spent so much effort in obtaining, well, there's a fully functional version of that inside Arnie's head. They made that much progress with a broken computer chip and an arm. That was all that had survived from the previous T-800. Imagine what damage a fully functional Terminator could do if he fell into the wrong hands, i.e. Cyberdyne Systems. And it's the T-800 that initiates this. He's the one that suggests this. This machine has found meaning to its existence. So I was 5 years old when I first saw this film, but it's as excellent today as it was back then to me. The special effects in this film are sumptuous. To me, this is the perfect mix of CGI and practical effects. I think this is probably the best of Arnold Schwarzenegger's performances. I mean, let's have it right. In the original Terminator film, he didn't have to do much acting at all, because at that point in his career, he was pretty much a blank canvas anyway. But by 1991, well, we was really familiar with Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was a big star. He had this on-screen persona, which we was all very familiar with. So for him, the real challenge was to downplay that, to not be the Arnold Schwarzenegger that we'd all fallen in love with, yet at the same time, give a little bit of nuance to the performance, the subtle character growth that he has throughout the film. And you get the sense as well that even at the very end of the film, there's still potential for growth there. And then there's Linda Hamilton, yet another fantastic performance in this film, because look at how she's grown as a character, going from the damsel in distress to this badass muscle mummy. And she does this without having any glamour to fall back on as well, because Sarah Connor is not a glamorous character. Nobody in this film is. And then there's Robert Patrick. I mean, he says like 3 lines in the entire film, yet somehow he's one of the most chilling villains of all time. And he was really committed to the role as well. They all was. I mean, Linda Hamilton worked out 6 days a week. And Christ knows what Arnie was doing. But Robert Patrick, he was something else. He taught himself to shoot without blinking. I can't even watch him in that film shooting without blinking myself. He got himself so fit that in the scene where he's chasing John on the motorbike, he had to slow down. He kept on catching the motorbike. Although saying that about the cast, Schwarzenegger didn't come cheap. He cost $15 million. In order to pay him, the production company had to go and finance a private jet for him to the value of like $12.1 million. And then they promised to pay him the rest in cash after they released the film. What a film though. But really, the key to this film's longevity is in its themes. For starters, we've got this kind of undercurrent of fear going on around technological progress. And a lot has been said about this in many other reviews, because Cameron can be quite sledgehammer in his messaging. But I'm going to choose to focus on one of the more subtle moments of this. There's that scene at the very beginning of the film where the T-1000 steals the police car and he uses the computer to access all the information he needs about John Connor. And in the last film, the T-800 had to use a phone book. And it's worth remembering that in 1991, yeah, computers was about and we was using them in our everyday lives, but nowhere near the extent of how we use computers nowadays. Computers in some cases were still quite exotic and people still were quite fearful of them. And you can see that from contemporary works of science fiction in how wildly inaccurate they were about just what computers could do. But in this scene, this little moment in this film, Cameron is basically saying that, hey, in the wrong hands, this tech, it can be quite dangerous. Look at the amount of information is at people's hands now. Another one of the big themes we've got going on here is this whole there's no fate but what we make thing. And at a cursory glance, that just may seem like, well, this film is espousing quite a badass personal philosophy. But in a broader perspective, there's a lot going on there. So it's easy, with the benefit of hindsight, to look back at the 90s and think to yourself, well, it was always going to end up like that. The 90s and the noughties were just destined to be the way they were. But in 1991, there's no way they could have seen that. They were witnessing the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. The entire lens which they viewed the world in, well, that was completely coloured by the Cold War. The entire world which they had all grown up in, well, that had completely changed overnight. They didn't know what the future held. But all they did know was, well, they had won. They had defeated the Soviet Union. They had won the Cold War. For them, they was triumphant. There was no fate but what they make. But I also declared boldly at the beginning of this video that I think this is the greatest family film ever made. Well, it's important to understand when I say that, I don't mean like this is a family film like It's a Wonderful Life is, or the latest Minions film. I mean purely and simply, this is a film about family. It's why there's so many different variations of the family unit seen in the film. As I mentioned, the completely dysfunctional foster family unit that John has the misfortune to be part of, or the seemingly functional Dyson family, where in actual fact, Miles Dyson is completely unavailable to his children, to the actually probably the most functional family in the film, which is John, Sarah and the T-800. So remember, this is 1991 we're talking about. You had a generation of people that had all grown up in the nuclear family. The boomers were taught from a very young age that the nuclear family was something that was seen to be aspirational. And this was promoted in the West, at least, because, well, the concept of the nuclear family was seen as a sort of bulwark against communism. But these kids had grown up and it was 1990 and they were saying, fuck you and fuck your rules. We don't want to live in this type of family. It doesn't matter what type of family we live in. All that matters is that we love each other. Furthermore, in promoting this, you're promoting some really toxic behaviours. And you're in deep denial of the fact that, well, that family setup, well, it ain't for everybody. Families can come in all shapes and sizes. It doesn't matter. So this film is simultaneously an action film, an action thriller, science fiction. It is a meditation on our relationship with technology. It is an exercise in technical excellence. It is also very subtly saying that, hey, all families are all relevant. But it shouldn't be lost on you that this post-nuclear family in the T-800, John and Sarah, were brought together by events that happen in a future that is post-nuclear. Thank you for watching, and as always, this is just my personal view. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you're inclined to, give me a follow on X. I'll put links in the description.
sounds like the end of the world. Flames dancing wild unfurled.